Okay, I think we're going to get going here. Good morning. This February 11th meeting from the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board is now called to order. Our chairman is traveling. As vice chairman, I, Joe Wardy, will be chairing the meeting. Is there any public comment this morning?
No, sir. We've received none.
Okay. Item 3 calls for discussion and action on the election of the CRRMA officers, vice chair, treasurer, secretary, and alternate secretary. Members of the board, I discussed this with our executive director this morning prior to the meeting. Dory Fennenbach will be late if she is able to attend this morning, and our newly appointed board member, Yolanda Hiner, is undergoing her bond application, or is completing her bond application and other documentation. Am I correct, Mr. Tejas?
That's correct.
In light of those two absences, I would ask the board for a motion to table this item until our next meeting. And the reason being, I believe by that time the governor will have appointed a new chair for the CRRMA, and our new board member will be able to sit and vote on the election of officers.
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item number 4 is adoption of the minutes for the CRRMA board meeting of January 14th, 2015. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? If so, I would accept a motion to approve.
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Item 5 is the presentation, discussion, and action to accept the FY 2014 annual audit per the recommendation of the CRRMA Finance Committee meeting of February 5th, 2015. Mr. Tejas?
Actually, I'd ask the board if we could postpone this item for a bit. The individual from our outside CPA, outside auditing firm, is actually stuck in traffic, so she's headed on in. If we could postpone this and we can come back to it shortly.
I don't think we need a motion to do that. I think we can go ahead. Okay, we'll move it further down, and somebody will have to remind me to revisit this issue. Item number 6 is discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute a local project advanced funding agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation for the development of the Old Waco Tanks Road project. Mr. Tejas?
Thank you. Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. So this item number 6 that you have before you, is more informational than anything. Going back in time, this part of the 2013 El Paso County Comprehensive Mobility Plan includes this particular project. And this project is actually the development of the Old Waco Tanks Road, which is, if you're familiar with the east side of town, it's really where East Lake hits I-10. East Lake is north of I-10. Old Waco Tanks is south of I-10. And this will actually complete the renovation and the extension of the project. It actually runs from I-10 down to North Loop Road. This is a project being developed in cooperation with TxDOT and the City of Socorro. The City of Socorro has retained responsibility for acquisition of right-of-way. TxDOT is providing the majority of the funding and has in fact completed the design to date. The RMA will pick up with the procurement and the oversight of the construction of this particular project. This project requires various agreements, and the first one is the one that you see before you. Back in October of 2014, we brought this item to the board asking for authority for the executive director to actually execute this agreement, and that authority was granted. However, since then, we've gone through various iterations and variations on the way that the project would be developed. So what I'm doing today is showing you the final version of the Local Transportation Project Advanced Funding Agreement with TxDOT. This is the final version that we've negotiated with them, and it has been tweaked. A lot of that is within the text and really more programmatic changes from TxDOT side than anything else. But also some of the details have been worked out with the city of Socorro in terms of their right-of-way acquisition process. So that you'll notice in attachment C, which identifies the contributions that the city of Socorro will be providing. So because the form has changed slightly from what was presented and approved in October of 2014, I felt it was important to bring you all this informational item. So no action is required unless you're interested in providing some. So with that, it's really just an informational item. No action required. Subject to your questions, of course.
Mr. Tejas, for the benefit of the public, would you just give us a brief recap of exactly what our role is in this project?
Absolutely. So with this particular project, and you'll recall under the 2013 El Paso County Comprehensive Mobility Plan, we play different roles with different projects. On this one, we are solely providing the procurement and the construction of the project. So once it's completed, we'll actually turn it over to either the City of Socorro or TxDOT once they figure out who's actually going to be required to do the maintenance on it. So the design has been completed to date by TxDOT in-house forces. They've provided that design to us. Once we execute this agreement, we'll have access to the TxDOT funding of, I believe, and it's actually in here. I believe it was about $9 million. The remaining funds, which will be required for the acquisition of the right-of-way, is coming from the City of Socorro. As I mentioned, City of Socorro has retained the responsibility for the actual acquisition. Once the right-of-way is then owned by the City of Socorro, we will then commence with construction. So our role is limited to procurement of and construction of the project.
Okay. So we need not take any action this morning on this?
That's correct. No action is required. This is informational only.
Thank you, Mr. Tejas. Item 7 on the agenda is discussion and action on a board resolution establishing scoring criteria and authorizing the issuance of a request for proposals for the vehicle component of the El Paso streetcar project.
Okay, so I'll ask IT. There we go. So you'll recall at last month's meeting, I gave you a briefing on the El Paso streetcar project, specifically the procurement processes that we would be utilizing to get this project up and running. And really what that means is we've decided to split the procurement into two distinct procurements for this particular project. One includes the procurement of the infrastructure, and the other is the vehicle procurement. What we did last month is I gave you a general rundown of the project and progress to date, as well as how we were planning to proceed with the infrastructure component, and included the scoring and criteria for the infrastructure component of the streetcar project. What I have for you today then is the vehicle procurement. So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk very briefly about the project procurement processes. Again, I'll just remind you what we talked about last month. We'll talk about the procurement timelines, which have been slightly updated for today. We'll talk about the vehicle scoring criteria that is being proposed today, and then I'll ask you to approve the scoring criteria and also ask you to approve or authorize the executive director to actually issue the request for proposals for the vehicle component. So this slide, you'll recall from last month that we have decided to go with two procurement processes for this particular project, infrastructure and vehicles. Infrastructure requires then two additional steps, which includes the request for qualifications, which has already been issued, and then that'll get us to a short list, and then we'll issue a request for proposals. The vehicle procurement only requires a request for proposal, so a single step on that one. The RMA board identifies the selection criteria and scoring for each procurement. You've already done that for infrastructure, and I'm asking for that today for the vehicle side. And each procurement will, of course, include an evaluation committee to develop a recommendation. That recommendation will come to the board, so the board will actually select the infrastructure and the vehicle contractors. This slide you'll recall also from last month, but it's been updated in the first two bullets. So this is the infrastructure procurement timeline. We have we have issued the RFQ that went out on January 20th, and within there we've included a February 19th proposal due date. The rest of the dates remain, which include the identification of the shortlist in March is what we're anticipating, with the RFP to be issued in April, proposals due in May, and June you'll be selecting an infrastructure contractor. That's the goal. This is the vehicle procurement timeline. So what we're anticipating is to issue the RFP within this month. Proposals would be due in April. The board would select a vehicle contractor in May. So by mid-2017, the contractor would begin delivery of the completed vehicles. And you can see the testing, acceptance, and startup would be complete in mid to late 2018. So this, and you may recall also I mentioned this last month, but the board has asked that in each procurement that we develop an issue, the board wants to be involved in the selection criteria and the scoring that would be utilized for that particular procurement. So that's what you see before you today. In the vehicle component of the streetcar project, we're proposing that we have a financial qualification section, which would be pass-fail, very similar to infrastructure. And then we would have two main categories. We'd have a technical proposal, which would account for 60% of the scoring, and a price proposal, which would account for 40%. Under technical, then, you can see everything that we would be looking for. We'd be looking at the proposed vehicle as demonstrated by completeness, detail, responsiveness, and adherence of the technical proposal by the submitting party to the applicable provisions of the RFP. We'd also be looking at management approach and schedule, system assurance and quality assurance plan, testing and system support approach, qualifications, experience, and references. So that collectively would account for 60% of the scoring, while the remaining 40% would go towards pricing. And that pricing would be in response to a schedule of prices that we provide to them within the request for proposals. So I'd mention also one other thing. This breakout, the 60-40, 60 technical, 40 scoring, was the same breakout that we had used for the selection of the systems integrator for our toll collection system. And I think it's important that, and we can speak in any level of detail you like. In fact, we have with us today our outside consultant, URS, who helped develop this scoring proposal. But I think it's important because of the unique nature of the procurement, in that we're asking for a refurbishment of the PCC vehicles, a very narrowly, a very specific type of vehicle. We think the technical proposal ought to be scored a little more aggressively than the price. So with that, then what I'm asking from you all, of course, is two items. First is a motion to adopt the selection criteria and the scoring, as we just discussed, for the vehicle component. The second then would be authorization for me to issue the RFP once it's complete, and it's actually nearing completion with our attorneys and our outside consultants as well. So subject to your questions, that's the board action that I'm asking for.
Ms. Melendez?
Raymond, how many vehicles are we talking about? Because I know we talked about 8 and then 9, but what are we proposing in this?
Well, so
all 9 of them? Or?
So the RFP hasn't been released yet, and we'll put the actual final number will be in the RFP. But I can tell you today that the City of El Paso has 9 vehicles. We will likely, in the end, when the RFP is actually issued, we'll likely have a base bid of X number of vehicles with add alternates heading all the way up to the 9.
Okay.
That's the intent.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Tejas? Any other comments on this, Mr. Tejas?
No, sir.
That being said, would entertain a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Well, let's see. Do we need to have 2 separate motions, Mr. Tejas? Can we take it as one motion? Okay, so we'll need a motion to adopt the selection criteria and scoring enumerated within this presentation for the procurement of the vehicle component of the El Paso streetcar project. Secondly, second part of the motion is to authorize the executive director to issue the request for proposals and associated documents and instruments as they relate to the vehicle component of the El Paso streetcar project. Do I have
So
a
moved.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. Item number 8 is discussion in action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute and submit the required annual compliance report to the Texas Department of Transportation.
So as you'll note from the backup included in your packets for today, the Texas Department of Transportation requires certain compliance submissions by by regional mobility authorities throughout the year. And one of them is actually, it's actually an effort at streamlining. There were several compliance requirements that we had to comply with since RMAs were created, in terms of providing TxDOT with copies of annual audits and annual reports and that sort of thing. What TxDOT did, I'd say, I think it was 2.5, 3 years ago, was they adopted rules that actually required those documents be provided to the local authorities, to the entities that within which the authorities operate. So in our case, that means the city of El Paso. So a lot of those responsibilities, instead of requiring us to provide documents to TxDOT, we now have to turn them over to the city of El Paso, which we do, and which we did incidentally anyway. But this is a bit of a change in terms of the compliance requirements. Instead of requiring us to turn in those documents to TxDOT, we simply have to turn in a compliance report which says that we are doing X, Y, and Z. So that's included in the backup. So, and I should mention, one of the things that we also actually have to do is have an action approved by the board to allow for the submission of the compliance report. So that's what you see before you today. So subject to your questions, I'd recommend approval of this item.
Are there any questions from the board? That being said, I entertain a motion, let's see, for a board resolution authorizing executive director to execute and submit the required annual compliance report to TxDOT. We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Parker, we have a point of discussion?
We do need to say that presumes that we will accept the independent auditor's report later in this meeting,
That's correct.
because that's in this. So, given that,
Probably revise the motion to make it contingent.
Hold on, let me get you. Go ahead, Mr. Carlsberg, again.
You may want to revise the motion, or I can revise the motion to make it contingent on acceptance of the auditor's report.
Okay, so you are amending your motion. Do we have a second to the amended motion?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. Mr. Tejas, I believe our representative from our CPA firm is in the building.
Excellent.
number 5.
So we will revisit item number 5, presentation, discussion, and action to accept the FY 2014 annual audit per the recommendation of the CRRMA Finance Committee meeting of February 5th, 2015. Mr. Tejas.
Thank you. So as you know, regional mobility authorities are also required to undergo annual audits by independent audit firms. We have retained the firm of Clifton Larson Allen for the last several years to complete these audits for us. And today we have with us Janet Pacheco Morton, who is part of the Clifton Larson Allen group, and she's here to provide you with the results of the annual audit for fiscal year 14.
Thank you, Mr. Tejas. Good morning, Ms. Morton.
Good morning. Thank you, board members, for waiting upon my arrival. I appreciate it. It's great to be here with you today. And as Raymond said, I'm Janet Pacheco Morton. I was the engagement principal on the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority audit for fiscal year 2014. So today I'll be providing the audit results to everyone. And please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation. So on today's agenda, I will go over the audit opinion, which is the ultimate outcome and the most important outcome from an audit. I'll go over some required governance communications that we are required as auditors to provide to those in governance, which is yourselves. I'll do a brief overview of the single audit, which is the audit of the federal expenditures. There was one restatement of prior year balances, and I'll cover that as well. I'll review any findings and internal control issues that may have been encountered during our audit, and then any audit completion procedures that we may have today at this point. As I mentioned before, the most important outcome of an audit is the auditor's opinion. I'm happy to say that the opinion that we issued over the financial statements of the authority is unmodified. That's the best opinion that you can obtain from an audit. It's a clean opinion, so I'm happy to share that with you today. What that audit opinion covers is the financial statements, which is all of the financial information of the authority as of fiscal year end 2014. It also covers the footnote disclosures within the financial statements. So what we are stating with an unmodified opinion is that the financial statements are materially stated and that they are presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We did have some significant accounting policies or statements that were implemented in the current year. The body that promulgates standards for governmental entities is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. There was a new statement, statement number 65, that did apply to the authority this year, and it was implemented. The change that affected the authority was to write off any bond issuance costs that the authority had on the books as of the prior year. Those were written off in the current year as a restatement to beginning balances. Any bond issuance costs in the future will also be charged to expenditures rather than capitalized and amortized over the life of the bond, the associated debt. So that's the change that affected the authority in the current year. We do have one significant accounting estimate in the financial statements, and that is the life of the intangible asset. The authority does have one intangible asset on the books. It's with regards to all construction expenditures that are not reimbursed by TxDOT and that are reimbursed via the toll agreement or toll fees, and this will happen over the next various years. So the effect of this is that any of those expenditures that are not currently being reimbursed by TxDOT, had you included those in expenditure rather than capitalized as an intangible asset, your net deficit position at end of year would be significant. So this year, at the end of the year, the total intangible asset balance is about $152 million, which is significant. I would like to draw your attention to some significant financial statement disclosures within the financial statements, and those are with regards to the service concession arrangement, which is what I just referred to, the intangible asset, and also the long-term debt. At year end, the long-term debt was about $293 million. I'm happy to say we had no difficulties encountered during the course of the audit. We did have one uncorrected misstatement, and that was $66,000 to record imputed interest on a non-interest bearing note. The $66,000 did not meet the threshold of materiality for the audit, so we opted not to post that adjustment, and management did not post that adjustment. So what a past adjustment is an adjustment that it is a potential misstatement, but as I said, it's not material to your financial statements and does not affect the balances or the opinion over your financial statements. But we are required to bring any of those such items to your attention. Some other points of interest: we had no disagreements with management. We are not aware that management consulted with other auditors, for instance, to obtain other opinions regarding implementation of a standard or a disagreement over accounting treatments, any of those items. And we had no difficulties in performing the audit. We did perform a single audit, and this is a compliance audit over your federal expenditures. In total, we had about $9.4 million in total federal expenditures this year, which is significantly less than you've had in the past. The major programs that were tested, and these major programs are selected based on guidance from the federal government. The ones that met the threshold for testing were the Federal Aid Highway Program, which is a pass-through from TxDOT, And then also under Texas state law, we are also required to test compliance with some state programs. So the two state programs are the state program over the America's Managed Lanes, and then the state program, which is the Cesar Chavez project. We did issue an unmodified opinion over your single audit as well, which is a clean opinion, the best opinion that you can obtain from an audit. I did include some definitions of findings in your presentation today, but I won't go over those. They're listed in the order of severity from deficiency in internal control to a material weakness. However, we had no findings that we discovered over the course of our audit, so that's very good news. We are also required to go over any prior year findings and follow up on management's how management addressed those findings, but we had no findings in the prior year either to follow up on. We have some audit completion procedures that are in process at the moment. The quality control review completion is an internal process within our office whereby a person who's not involved in the audit does a full review of the audit procedures as well as the report that we issue prior to our issuing the report to you to ensure that it's complete and that it meets all the required standards. That is in process at the moment. We expect that we should be able to issue the report either today or tomorrow. Management approval of draft financial statements, and that will be completed as soon as we receive the management representation letter. We cannot obtain that management representation letter until the quality control process is completed, so that's pending the quality review procedures. And then, of course, the board approval of the draft financial statements. That concludes my presentation today. I would welcome any questions from the board.
Any questions, board members? Okay, so let me go back here. So we will need a motion from the board to accept the FY 2014 annual audit per the recommendation of the CRRMA Finance Committee meeting of February 5th, 2015.
So moved.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Morton. Mr. Tejas, I want to take this opportunity in front of the board and the audience to thank you for your efforts. It's very rare to have audits where they don't find absolutely something other than reclassification of expenses, and I would like you to introduce the member of your staff from the city that has been instrumental in helping you complete the process.
Thank you, and I'm glad you're mentioning that. SB Garcia is our most recent addition from the OMB division of the City of El Paso. She's been a great help. I'd also mention Melissa Guevara, who works for us through the Peña Briones outside CPA firm. She's the two of them together have really helped us achieve this. So I appreciate them both. Thank you.
Ms. Garcia, thank you for your efforts. They are appreciated and recognized by the board today. Okay, item number 9 is the update, discussion, and action on the Executive Director's report. A is the City Council reappointment of board members Melendez and Karlsruher. B is the City Council appointment of a new board member, Yolanda Giner. And C, the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry operations and maintenance discussions. Mr. Tejas?
Thank you. So I'll be brief on each of these, and the first two in particular speak for themselves. At last Tuesday's board city council meeting, the council, and actually let me take a step back. As you'll recall, the city council of the city of El Paso is required each February to either reappoint 6 of the 7 board members or replace them. And when I say that, I actually mean 3 of them. So the board terms are staggered. So each February, 3 of the board members are up for either reappointment or replacement. So this last Tuesday, the city council actually reappointed board members Melendez and Karlsruher, and actually appointed a new board member, Yolanda Hiner, who was trying to be here with us today but couldn't make it. So, and I'm working, as the vice chair noted, I'm working with Ms. Hiner to get her oath of office in place and all the other documents required to get in place so that she can serve with us, hopefully at the March board meeting. So she'll be adding to the ranks next month. So the last item is Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry. This one, you may recall, we've talked a little bit about in the past. We helped the county of El Paso develop, install, and we're currently testing their toll collection system at the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry, the new port of entry that the county of El Paso is getting ready to open here later this year. So we helped them install that toll collection system, and part of that discussion was we are the tolling entity for the region, so obviously it makes a lot of sense for us to help them through an intergovernmental relationship. So we helped them with that. But also what we began discussing back then when we first talked about their toll collection system was the potential approach to operating and maintaining the facility through the use of the RMA. So we had talked to them a little bit about that back then. Since then, we've worked with them to identify the areas that they'll need to cover for their operations and maintenance. As you know, the county has no currently operating bridge operations. So they were looking at various solutions, whether they did it in-house and created their own department, whether they went out to a third party, or whether they agreed to some type of an intergovernmental, interlocal relationship with the RMA. So back on, I want to say it was January 22nd, the county staff presented a PowerPoint to the Commissioners Court presenting those three options and outlining different ways that they could take to deal with their operations and maintenance for that facility. At that meeting, the Commissioners Court in the end took no action and actually asked for the RMA to make a presentation to the Commissioners Court outlining the benefits, the reasons for the RMA's involvement, why it makes sense, and that sort of thing. So back on, it was last week, I believe, myself, Greg Blake from our general engineering consultant, and the vice chair went to Commissioners Court and presented to them why we thought it made sense that we partner with them on it. In the end, I think we did fairly well. The vice chair, I think, helped tremendously explaining the regional approach and why that made sense for our community. In the end, the Commissioners Court unanimously directed staff to begin negotiating with the Camino Real RMA for the RMA to operate and maintain their facility. So we'll begin those negotiations very soon, and I'm hopeful that as early as the March meeting, we'll be back to you with a draft agreement for approval and moving forward. So I wanted to brief you all on that. I imagine you've seen some of that in the newspaper. I'm trying to keep ahead of the press, but that's the most recent information that we have, and I'll keep you posted as we go through this process as well.
Mr. Tejas, for the benefit of the board members, the meeting with the Commissioners Court I thought was very fruitful. There were significant discussions on real hard numbers. Our representative from Atkins did a wonderful job with us on presenting real numbers for them. There was a very lively discussion, but I can tell you that our goal as the Mobility Authority is to be a focal point and to help governmental agencies make a strategic decision for mobility in our community by the very nature of our definition. So the county coming forward, there was a question whether or not, well, what if the city at some point decides that they don't want to participate? Well, that's further down the line, and those are very extensive discussions. But initially, because we operate the Cesar Chavez Highway and we're going to do the extension of the border highway, and if we do this piece with Tornillo Guadalupe, and at some point, if and when the city would participate, we could possibly have a one-stop shop with one device or one for any type of mobility in our community, which I think would go a long way to set us apart from other communities. So strategically, I think it's important for us to push in that direction. And I wanted to make sure that my fellow board members understood what we discussed, and that was my point of the discussion. And I think the Commissioners Court received it pretty well. So I want to thank Mr. Tejas for making a good presentation. We had good data from our consultants also.
Thank you. So subject to your questions, that's all I have for you today. Very brief meeting.
Are there any questions of Mr. Tejas at all on any of these items? Okay, that being said, it appears I'll accept a motion to end the meeting.
Move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We are finished today. Thank you.